Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn McCauley, and I'm the author and speaker events manager here at 6th and I. Whether you're here with us in person or watching virtually from home, on behalf of 6th and I and our partner Politics and Prose, thank you so much for being with us tonight and continuing to support nonprofits and independent bookstores. For those who may be new to 6th and I, we're a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. For 18 years and within this historic sanctuary dating back to 1908, our mission has been to inspire more meaningful and fulfilling lives through an unexpected mix of experiences that embrace the multifaceted identities of those we serve. Tonight, we are so excited to welcome Ottessa Moshfegh to our stage to celebrate the release of her new novel, Lapvona. Ottessa is the New York Times bestselling author of My Year of Rest and Relaxation and Death in Her Hands, and Booker Prize shortlisted novel, Eileen. Known for characters who are outsiders, unlikable, and often dark, her readers can't look away. Lapvona satiates that same appetite, all but set in a fictional medieval fiefdom of the same name, rather than the modern-day America of her previous work. An omniscient narrator charts Merrick, the disfigured son of a sheep farmer, Lord William, the petulant and scheming ruler living in hilltop luxury, and Ina, the blind village midwife who can communicate with animals, just to name a few. By the end, every line that existed in the beginning has been blurred. Tonight, Ottessa Moshfegh is in conversation with Barrie Hardymon, senior editor at NPR's Weekend Edition and the lead editor for books. She is a frequent panelist on NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour. We're so excited to welcome her to our stage for the second time this year. Later in the program, we'd love to hear your questions, and you'll be invited to line up at the microphones in either aisle. Following the event, signed books will be for sale in the main lobby. Thank you all again, both here and at home, for being with us tonight, and please join me in giving Ottessa Moshfegh and Barrie Hardymon a warm welcome to 6th and I.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to see everybody. And you as well.
And you.
So I do want to say to everybody, because just as a fair warning, is that I really loved this book. And I bet that everybody here has read Year of Rest and Relaxation and probably wants to talk about it. I see so many heads nodding. That's awesome. I'm not going to. But you can ask those questions in about 40 minutes. So I do want to talk a lot about this book, which is very different in some ways, and similar in others, because they have the same author.
That's true.
There's that. But so let's, because it hasn't been out very long, so I'm assuming that probably not very many people have read it yet. This is a fairy tale. Like if it were written by like a mad Brechtian, it's a kind of a fable. Can you tell us how you would describe it?
I would describe it as a novel set in the late Middle Ages.
Okay.
But my sense of the novel is like pretty wide.
Mm-hmm.
So a novel could be a fable, a fairy tale, or some smash up of a genre,
mm-hmm.
or a perversion of a genre. And I really just wanted to tell the most interesting story. And turned out that in order to tell the most interesting story, I needed a lot of characters.
You have so many characters.
Yeah. Yes. Hopefully not too many.
No.
But, enough.
Yes.
Enough so that you get a sense of the world which is Lapvona. And Lapvona is the name of this village or fiefdom.
Mm-hmm.
Not really specified area.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, it feels like it's where is it? It feels European, but medieval. But also, like, I don't know why I kept seeing this as though it were like on a stage.
That's really interesting.
Because it does have that sort of medieval quality of, like, they're wandering through the forest, this sort of the village and so the village is Lapvona. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was curious about this setting. Is it European? Is it, how did you come up with this particular fiefdom?
Well, I mean, roundabout several ways. I mean, the first way was I started writing this during lockdown. I hadn't been planning to write a novel, but the lockdown seemed like both an opportunity and an obligation.
Pressure.
Okay,
Yeah.
write a novel to survive and also to somehow archive this experience. And the pandemic, I think, I think this is true for a lot of people, really shifted my perspective from, me and my life and the people around me to more of a global perspective. And for some reason, that had me thinking about time and the passage of time in human history, and I started thinking about my ancestry. And ancestry that is pretty mysterious to me.
Oh.
So my father's from Iran, and actually, I've never done 23andMe, but my little brother had done it. And his genetics were very clear. 50% Persian Jew, 50% all of this other stuff from Europe.
Yeah.
And my mother is from Croatia. So I was like, wow, how did we get so jumbled up? And then, obviously, everyone was going through there. I mean, so I was talking to my mom and kind of remembered that she used to tell me this thing whenever I would come to her and express like self-doubt or, what she perceived as weakness. And she would say, don't forget, you come from pirates.
Oh my God.
And so I was like, is that really true?
I think you should. That's like that's a marketable parenting phrase, I feel like.
Oh, she has so many. She has a lot of those. So I started researching, like when would there have been piracy on the Adriatic?
Yeah.
And that led me to some, weird medieval history book. And I was like, oh, this is actually getting interesting. I didn't want to write a pirate book because I had kind of done that when I set my very first book on a ship in 1850. So I was like, okay, let me go to the land.
Yep.
So I was sort of referencing a vague Eastern European landscape that was a good distance away from the sea so that it could feel isolated.
Yes.
And the way I started to imagine Lapvona was in literally imagining the geography and topography of the land.
Oh, wow.
Doing research, daily life in a medieval village. The first thing you find out is that the Lord's Manor is, obviously protected up on a hill. Okay, so there's a hill. Then, where are the farms? Where are the forests? Where's the water coming from? And suddenly the architecture of the landscape started to come together. And it really did feel like a very ambient way of imagining. Like I tried to imagine being there and sort of hearing the wind through the particular kind of trees that I had put there, and the sound of the animals. And I did a lot of research on sheep because, not a coincidence. There's some lambs in the book. And it just was a world that got built little by little.
Is this how you often write? I mean, that seems like a much more, like you said, ambient way of, have you written from this kind of place?
No.
Before? Oh, so this was a new experience.
It was totally new, and it was fun because I have never written a book in the third person before. Everything has been I. Eileen, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, McGlue, my very first book, and most of my short stories are in the first person. And I got, I learned that there's a particular experience you have as a writer when you have to occupy the mind of your protagonist, who's also your narrator.
Yeah.
You have to start thinking in the way that your protagonist narrator would speak and tell their own story. So I hadn't ever written a novel where I, separate from any character, could design the tone of the narration.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. I was going to say, it's funny. I mean, I really, literally, it's, I'm going to read this out loud, which says, "You've handled the third-person narration so deftly." Because no, I really think that third-person narration is so hard. Because it is both it's almost the simplest way, right, to describe a thing, but also to have it also reveal the story at the same time. And it is striking in that it is not this like highly interior, which I've come to expect from, one of your books. But I will say this, which is that I felt very much each character does have a deeply felt interior life, even though it is in a third person. And it feels to me, and I wonder if this is how it feels to me, that Marek is kind of the center of this world. That he's and he's. I mean, I really love Ina, but he's the one that I feel like in a difficult world is the one that I can almost see, I can identify. His interior life makes sense to me.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I wonder, so for our audience, can you describe him? Because there's some physical things about Marek that are really very intense. And so tell everybody about Marek.
All right. Well, Marek is an adolescent boy who is being raised by the man he believes is his father, who's the village lamb herder, Jude. And they have a very strange, intense, and codependent relationship. Marek is a lot like his dad, an outlier of society. He doesn't really have many friends. Mm-hmm. He has kind of two friends that I can think of. And he sees himself as a very special person. And part of what makes him special is that his physicality is not typical. Mm-hmm. And to be perfectly honest, I was curious about what it would feel like as the writer to write a character that had scoliosis, because I have scoliosis, and it's been such a huge part of my life and how I formed a relationship with myself and pain.
Yeah.
And so I kind of gave that to Marek and exploited it so that it was part of his personality. Mm-hmm. that he had grown. I think in the book it says like he had grown against nature. Mm. That perceived deformity of his is something that he compensates for sort of intellectually and emotionally by thinking that he is this pitiable character, but at the same time very, very angry.
Yeah.
And he doesn't think anyone knows. He's a character of deception in a lot of ways. And you don't expect that from a 12-year-old, I mean, maybe you do, but I
have an 11-year-old, so I'm gonna plead the fifth. But yeah.
Okay. Well, Marek, Marek doesn't have a normal, he doesn't have a normal life. Oh, let's just say that.
So I'm interested in the scoliosis. So this was a way for you to talk about. So when you talk about him as a perceived deformity, what is this? These are things that you internalized about. This was the conversation you had with yourself about scoliosis growing up. Or?
Yeah, I mean, and at the same time, it was developing scoliosis. Yeah. Often happens like right at the beginning of your growth spurt.
Oh, so at the worst possible time. Okay.
And in adolescence, it's that moment where you're kind of realizing that you're a person, like you're a very specific person, and you're looking at your parents differently. You're seeing that like one day you're going to be a grown up. Yeah. So the way that I came to know myself was so much in relationship to understanding that there was something wrong, that it was out of control, that it needed to be controlled. I wore a back brace for 2 years, and that the way that I was growing was causing me to suffer. And so that was, like, I haven't written about that, and Marek seemed like a good vehicle.
Yeah.
And the physical aspect of the pain that Marek experiences, I thought, was a good opportunity to sort of link his character to a bigger theme in the book, which is faith. And physical pain, being physically injured, all of those kinds of things for Marek are a way for him to feel connected to the divine. And him and his father share that. That's sort of like their faith together, which leads to, unfortunately, some violence.
Some.
Yeah.
So I want to get to that, but I also am really interested in this part, like as we were talking before, and also, this is true for, I think, for all your books. You write bodies and what's happening with bodies in the most visceral way. And I have to imagine that some of that is because of your own experience and relationship to this growing body, to the pain. And so some of the earlier sort of the ways that, so every character in this book, by the way, has a thing about them, which is sometimes magical, like in the case of Ina, and sometimes, in the case of Marek, is this, sometimes but it does seem to me that you are imbuing everybody's body with a magic, be it dark magic or not. And is that how you see everybody?
I don't know. I mean, it's a fictional project, so I'm taking some liberties, and there is some phenomenological stuff going on.
Sure.
Like the Lord William,
right,
who's this pretty hilariously despicable guy, very highly delusional, is
very funny.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is partly characterized by an unquenchable appetite, just an absolutely endless appetite, and yet he's stick thin. So it's like, that it's a metaphor, right? I mean, like, he can't get enough because he's so spiritually bereft. He's empty.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He needs to be constantly eating, constantly drinking, constantly entertained, constantly, the center of attention.
Yeah. It's interesting. So he and, a lot of the characters in this book, the way that they relate to each other and to themselves is around this sort of the concept of God in this book. He's often there's a priest, who is corrupt. It seems to me that everybody's relationship with faith in the way they perform it is corrupt, but they still have this very real interior piety. And I wonder, where is God in this book? Is God in this book?
Well, okay, I don't know, but just
you don't have to tell me.
What you're saying is so interesting because, like, the way that you laid it out, like the performance of faith and the actual faith is, I mean, to me, that the difference there describes exactly the limitation of what it is to be human. Like, I can tell you, I mean, all I have is language, I have art, I have, however much psychic force I can summon, but I can't tell you how it feels inside, and what God means to me. That's a really big one, but, God, for me, God is in the book. because it's an act of giving. And
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote it for people.
Yeah.
And I pondered God the whole time.
It's an interesting book where it feels like there's a bleakness, sure, to the world. This is a medieval world where, you know, you've got the manor on the hill and the villagers. This is, you know, the sort of social dynamics are hard. But the presence of God is sort of everywhere because they're always talking about it.
Yeah.
And then also there are these elements, which I think is sort of wonderful, of like, you know, the phenomenological, the sort of mystery parts of it. And so it doesn't actually, you could see this as cynical, right? You know, there are ways, but it doesn't feel that way, in part because of the magic in a funny way. Tell me about let's talk about Ina. I think she's a good way to sort of get into that. I think she's she's one of the most likable characters in the book.
Okay.
And don't worry, someone has asked you the unlikable character question.
Good.
So
I don't know what's happening if that's not the question. Okay.
But I want to talk about a likable one, which is Ina. And I think, tell everybody who she is.
Okay.
And yeah.
Well, I pronounce her name Ina.
Ina. Oh my goodness, I'm
because
sorry.
I didn't want, in my own head, I didn't want it to rhyme with a certain part of
yes.
the body.
Oh my
that
God,
is so
I really
associated with Ina.
How embarrassing.
And I didn't realize that until later. I was like, okay, Ina. When I did the audiobook, I was like, it's Ina.
Okay, fab. from henceforth.
Yeah. So Ina is a really different kind of character in the story. All the other characters are sort of living in real time. They have, you know, had lives that are marked by having been born in a certain year and people know them and yada, yada, yada. Ina has had a completely different story. Her life is explained, but it is full of mystery.
Yes.
She's from Lapvona. From what time, we don't know. It says in the book, you know, she could be as much as 100 years old. I mean, I think she could be 500 years old. Who knows? But she sort of developed some magical powers after having magically survived a plague. She wakes up in her home as a teenager. All of her family are dead. She's alive, but she's been blinded by whatever this illness has been. She's shunned by everyone for having, you know, mystically come back from the dead.
Right.
They try to send her to a nunnery, but she runs away. And she's that kind of girl. She learns how to survive by really communing with nature.
Yeah.
She learns bird song. She becomes wise. She is like, you know, she lives for how many decades in the woods and only decides to re-enter society when one day, as though by magic, she produces breast milk. This breast milk is not only like this, you know, incredible thing to happen. She's a virgin. She's absolutely not pregnant. But it also gives her the ability to see when she drinks it. So bit by bit, sort of getting to know herself in this new way, she slowly re-enters Lapvona. And by this time, everyone she's known has lived and died, and there are all new people there. The village has changed a lot, and they surprisingly take her in. And they're like, oh, great, we really need a wet nurse in this community. And so she's kind of respected. She nurses, you know, everyone in the village, and it's good for the economy. The women don't have to stay home with their babies. They can work in the field. And it becomes this whole thing. But by the time we meet her, for some reason, her milk has dried up. And she's kind of retired and is living in a little cabin in the woods.
when did you decide that you were going to have this element of this kind of mysterious element, and what appeals to you about the kind of the particular, just with the breast milk in particular? I love all the metaphorical with the breast milk in general. I think is just so wonderful and funny and weird. But just the fact of this thing, which is, as a, there's, I don't want to give too much away, but there's, developments and, but that particular mysterious quality feels different to me than your other books.
Yeah. Yeah, she is different. I don't really know where she came from, but I think, I think it's really Marek who conjured her.
Oh, interesting.
Marek, kind of has his own origin story in a way, and it's a story that his father has told him. Mm-hmm. And the story goes, your mother gave her life for you. She died giving birth to you, and if you're good, you'll see her in heaven. So you should really do whatever I say. And he's just been starving for maternal love, and finds Ina and attaches to her. And I think maybe she has this. Ina kind of knows everything, and she probably has a sense of what's to come later on.
Yeah.
But she bonds with Marek, and they have a very strange relationship.
It is both, it's maternal, but it's also, adult, and they're
weirdly intimate.
It's intimate, yeah. And their sort of kinship does feel. I understand what you say when you say he conjured her. Mm-hmm. That feels right.
Sort of an adolescent fantasy
of
a mother.
Yeah, exactly. It's what every young adolescent boy wants. Maybe I don't know.
Maybe.
Or what we've been told. I don't know.
We don't know.
But his interior, he is such an interesting character, and he again, like I said, he feels like he's driving the book. And one of the things that I really like about this book, actually, is I feel like, we spend so much time with your female characters in other books. You're really considering the men in this way, and I like it. And I wonder how that has, was it different to sort of say, in particular because you say you've imbued Marek with some elements that are part of your psyche,
Yeah. I mean, I identify as female, but I don't feel really particularly feminine.
Yeah.
So writing male characters with varying degrees of masculinity and femininity just kind of felt like exploring more of the continuum of what a character can be. Mm-hmm. And it was liberating because, Eileen and the protagonist in my year of rest and relaxation, their gendered experience was such a large part of their stories. But that's not necessarily a reflection of my interests in characters. That those are just two books that I wrote. It's not my
two characters that were in your brain.
Right. And I really enjoyed writing from a third person point of view, these male characters, because I didn't have to take them on and speak for them in a way that I feel like, because I'm female, I can speak for women in whatever. I mean, I don't actually even
subscribe. Yeah.
But there was this freedom because in the third person, you can get very, 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 very close to a character. You can get inside the character, but you aren't speaking for them. Mm-hmm. And that was exciting.
That's such a wide array of characters and of male characters. William, and who is, like you say, cartoonishly absurd, but also very funny. And it's hard to, a thing about him in particular that I I felt the book was sort of I was considering because of, as I read this, is that he is this delusional person who is the one with all the power.
Yeah.
And that feels, I know that I've read at least that you are not that you are metabolizing politics, but you're not making a political statement. That felt familiar to me, a delusional person in charge of, and I wonder if did you see the kind of the writing from that tyrannical of this person? Does it feel like it came out of anything that has been sort of in the ether, or is that just a person that came with this village?
Oh, I mean, no, you could, yeah.
How'd you like that dance I just did around that?
That was
like,
fantastic.
Thanks, everybody. I'm exhausted already. Yeah. Whew, thank you.
No, I like the word metabolizing. Yeah, I mean, I definitely I don't know if, selfishly writing about a character who I see as a buffoon, and ascribing to that character some traits of a certain person that I feel is also a buffoon is like helpful. I mean, it kind of was helpful to process the absurdity of
I liked
power.
reading it. So, as a person, it did feel processy for me, to sort of, and in fact, there are, and I have to say this, there are a lot of like awful things that happen in this book, even though this book is quite funny. It's some gruesome things with a real heavy wit about it, and I guess there's something about it when I read something that is graphic. That
It is, yeah.
I think it really. I was surprised at how lightly I read it because of the tone, and I wondered I wonder what it feels like to write that stuff, not just the buffoon in charge of these poor people, but the sort of these acts of violence and even just, when they're starving and they're, excrement plays a role in much of this. There's a real, like, visceral quality to it. And yet I sort of wore it awfully lightly, which gave me a feeling of, I thought, is that okay? What do you want people to feel when they're reading this book, which is chock full of some really creative, gross stuff?
Yeah. I mean, what do I want people to feel?
Maybe that's not the right question. Maybe it's more, what do you feel when you write it? Because,
okay.
Yeah.
I feel activated. I feel excited.
Fascinating.
I feel like I'm getting at something accurately. If my adrenaline is pumping because of an image or a scene, and it feels correct.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. And I'm not just. It's not a video game, right? I mean, the acts of violence are.
They're not silly.
They're not. Well, there are a couple of really.
There's some silly ones, but yeah.
But they're part of the story,
right?
And they're also part of life, and
part of the setting.
Yeah,
really.
And life in the late Middle Ages was, we didn't. Where did people throw away their garbage? So I'm not trying to sanitize this world, and so the way that I want the reader to feel is that they can smell what it smells like. They can feel fear or dread about not having any water.
Yeah.
I didn't want. It's interesting that you read it lightly, because the response has been.
I think it's because you have to. It does come fast and furious.
Okay.
it's not that I read it lightly, so I feel like I don't mean to, but
I'm
but
curious.
just that sort of that I was able to, after the first couple of, because it is so intense and so visceral, that I thought, okay, this is just part of this world, and so I'm going to just keep consuming it, and I'm not going to be, knocked over by each new horror, because they aren't.
Yeah, I hear you.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. They're living through it.
What does horror? Is there something? I don't want to ask you the question, but like, is there a line? But what horrifies you? Like, are there, when you can write a book that creates this world that is so difficult and sometimes bleak? Do you feel that there's a book in you where you get closer to the actual horror, not just the setting horror, but this feels like a different chord when it comes to that kind of stuff. Like what other, and your books are, frankly, there are a lot of difficult things. I have to imagine that maybe what is hard for you to read?
What is hard? Like anything that feels contrived. Like anything that feels like really manipulative in a transparent way.
Yeah.
Where I feel like the author doesn't respect my intelligence, that I find is horrifying.
But
because what it
broke into a cold sweat.
What it does for me is it confirms a fear that I've had, which is that people are willing to basically buy into a lie. The emperor's new clothes. Like, oh, that's really great. Oh, yeah, it's great. Oh, did you read that? Yeah, it's great. And I read it, I'm like, I don't see what's great. I'm actually feeling like this is not, like, are we all able to agree because it's not threatening? And so we're saying, here's our standard. Let's set it low so that we can all agree and not get upset about it.
Yeah.
And then the way, like, what that says to me about society or like human civilization in general is that we are, excuse me, more comfortable living in a delusion than living in a pace of life that occurs when you are growing through being challenged. Like we'd rather stay where we are and be boring. And I don't know, I find that horrifying.
Now I really, the contrast between that and feeling activated, which I think is what you feel with this book. It is like very and there is nothing in it that doesn't feel that it is part of the setting or the narrative, for real. And so now I understand those comparisons, and that does seem more, yeah. It's really interesting because I do, when you're talking about something feeling real, this is a fable too. This is a kind of, and so in a funny way, it feels like you're doing something really sort of elemental that fiction does. You're telling this fairy story, right? But it's somehow more real than a lot of the things that we all agree on that are kind of, boring,
Or just bogus.
Yeah. It's not the boring, it's the bogus that I think really is What makes you, this started with a setting, but you have a lot of characters who are, this is do these characters, did they populate this world because of the plot, or did some of them just sort of are they just characters that have been hanging around your head?
Well, I'll tell you what the seed for the book was.
Besides the pirates, which I love.
Well, yes. What preceded any concept of what this book was or where it was set, what time, was the premise of really like Marek's transformation.
Oh,
Marek, so in the most elemental way, one boy accidentally on purpose kills another boy and is then taken as the replacement son by the parents who are in mourning. That I was sitting on that for like years, and I couldn't figure out why or what it was for.
Where'd it come from?
I don't know. I mean, I think maybe it had something to do with losing my brother.
Oh, interesting.
And it's like my brother passed away on my husband's birthday, and we were engaged. And so sometimes I think about that, you know, the loss and the gift of family. You know, it could have been that. It could have been just, I don't know, some random fantasy. I have no clue.
But it's been around for a while, just
Yeah.
You know, and that's how that. That's fascinating. Do you want to go back to Lapvona? Is this particular kind of writing, the sort of third person of like the village of this? Is this a one in?
It does feel one and done.
Yeah. Well, not that there would be a sequel. I just mean that. I mean, clearly that. Yeah. But is this kind of, you know, the sort of medieval, fairy fable-y feel? Is that a thing you would revisit?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Not immediately.
It's so interesting just because this is such a different book. And so I guess I imagine that the next one is maybe going to be even more, you know, a whole different, you know.
I hope so.
Yeah. I do think also that before I go to audience questions, I do want to talk a little bit about the cover, which I love. Is this a cover that you had something to do with?
Well, my publisher is...
Sometimes they do, and sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't, so I'm just curious.
No, my publisher has always been really willing to collaborate with me.
Oh, good, okay.
And I just sent them like a whole trove of images that I thought were interesting and powerful. And this was kind of the first one that we were like, oh, yeah. And then we kind of thought, well, maybe we need something less macabre. So we went all around trying to do this other thing, and then we just landed back on the lamb. And I love it.
I love it too. I love that from far away, it looks cute. Which is sort of like your village.
Yeah, it's a pretty place.
Exactly. Like it's a really lovely, you know, and then when you get closer, it looks like something's wrong, you know. But I think this is one of these books where the cover really feels like the spirit of it is really. And then I guess my last question is that I do, and I think people have probably asked this before, but can you tell everybody what the epigraph is?
Oh, the epigraph is a line from, it's a lyric from a Demi Lovato song. And it goes, I feel stupid when I pray. It's from a song called Anyone. And I was really inspired to include it because I saw a performance by Demi Lovato from, I think it was the 2020 Grammys. And she had just kind of come back from having almost lost her life because of I think what was a drug overdose. And had been really open about it, which I think was really courageous. And in the performance, she is all alone. She's wearing this very strangely Baroque, like white gown with just a piano and a microphone. She's not playing the piano. She's just standing there singing. And she starts to sing, and she is crying, and so she has to stop. And, you know, there's like this hush, and the crowd applauds her, and she kind of like gets her nerve back and gets focused, and then performs this song that just like absolutely blew me away and gave me the chills. And it's really about feeling so desperate for anyone is the title of the song, to come and help her.
Yeah.
And to me, it was really about asking, like, is there help? Is there something out there for me? Like, or am I all alone?
What's the point of this prayer?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that feels right. That really does feel right for the book. And I feel like, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but since this is a book that is about relationship to faith, it feels like at the end of it, even despite the bleakness of the book, that it's everybody's own relationship is what it is, and that faith is something you feel strongly about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you.
I'm going to now go to audience questions. So you guys can come on up to there's 2 microphones here. And I think while you do that, I'm going to go ahead right now and I'm going to ask that question. Which I'm just going to do it, which is, readers often describe your characters as unlikable. Do you agree with that assessment, ma'am?
I think everyone is unlikable.
Yeah, I think that's a good applause line.
So sure.
Yeah.
Correct assessment.
Is that a question that irritates you, when the likable versus unlikable?
It just makes me wonder, like, who have you been listening to that you are concerned about that, or that's your category?
Fiction.
Yeah. I mean, it seems really archaic and sexist. And I think we should just let it go.
I do too. I just wanted to hear you say all that.
All right.
And now we can move on. Who's first? I think you. Oh, I think I saw you first, but it could be either. Oh, you guys are being so nice. We're going to do both of you, so it doesn't, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. I love the new novel, and I named my cat Eileen, and I have a question about Eileen, which also, I guess, connects to Lapvona as well. I think, like, in Eileen, like, she spends the book, like, looking for human connection, and she thinks she's found it with Rebecca, and then at the end, what sort of, like, struck me as, like, such this, like, genuine form of human connection she finds is with Mrs. Polk, and like, this empathy she has with her, but it's, like, an empathy that, like, necessarily denies any mercy, and, I mean, I don't want to spoil Eileen for anyone, but there's no mercy for Mrs. Polk. And I, like, found that, like, tension between, like, empathy and mercy, like, really interesting. And I found, like, in your other novels as well, like, empathy, mercy, and, like, pity kind of interacting in these really interesting ways, like, especially also in Lapvona. And I was, like, wondering if you could just, like, speak more about that, or maybe specifically about, like, Eileen and, like, writing the character of, like, Mrs. Polk and how Eileen connects with her. But yeah, empathy, mercy, operative words. Yeah.
Whoa. Thank you. That's a very deep question. Not sure I'm equipped to answer it, but I don't know. I don't know what this says about me, but I don't really think about empathy. Like, I think if you have to think about it, then you might be a sociopath. But I do think about the way that one character can reveal something to another character that they really despise about themselves. And that really is true for Eileen and her experience in the basement when Mrs. Polk explains to justify her being complicit in the sexual abuse of her son. And her excuse is, disgusting, but completely comprehensible. And it irks Eileen and resonates with Eileen because she too is willing to forfeit what she thinks is right. I guess her integrity, in order to feel loved and connected. And so there's certainly some compassion and empathy there, yeah. And I think also disgust. So, Yeah, mercy is a weird concept because whoever is yielding it has so much power. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about mercy. Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks for spending your evening with us. Going back to your comment about the fear of boredom and complacency, how do you prevent those forces from creeping in and taking over your life, both interior and exterior?
Oh man, it's really hard because sometimes you really just want to veg out. And but I guess what I would say is like I don't give up. Like there's been a lot of negative criticism of this book and a lot of people who I think really misunderstand it. And it's very uncomfortable to sit in that place, but to also know that I believe what I've done is of great value and that I need to persist in that even if it makes people uncomfortable. And I guess that general, spirit is helpful to me because, I don't own a television, which does not mean I do not watch television series, but I guess I just try to be efficient with the time that I need to spend doing nothing so that I don't get brainwashed by too much garbage.
Thank
I
you.
don't know. It's a hard question.
I'm just going to go back and forth, so you're next.
I also had a question about Eileen. And
Okay.
Something that struck me when I first read it was how when you get to that pivotal climax, it's so shocking, but it also, like, I had to take a moment and step away from the book. And when I went back to it, I realized how much of the book leading up to it had been laying the groundwork so that it all made sense when I looked back at what had just happened. And so I wanted to know, did you go into writing Eileen knowing that that's where it was headed, or was that something that you found along the way? And was there anything that inspired you in writing that?
There was definitely something that inspired me. And it was that right when I moved to LA, which was in 2011, probably within the first few weeks of living there, I happened to be at a dinner with this documentary filmmaker and just making pleasantries. I said, well, what did you do today? And he said that he had been shooting his documentary in a prison and had a conversation with a very young man who was serving life sentence without the possibility of parole for having really violently murdered his father because he was being sexually abused by his father. And his mother had been complicit in that abuse. And, it was years later, not that many years, several years later that I wrote Eileen, but I could not get the particulars of that story out of my head. And I couldn't figure out, why would a mother do that? Like, what? It just baffled me. And so I felt like I needed to figure it out. How could I possibly make room for that in my understanding of humanity? The dad is one thing, but I guess being a woman and aligning myself more with wanting to protect people, which the mother was in the position to do, not being a pedophile. It just really baffled me. So that inspired me. And because I went into the book with that in mind, I always knew we were going down into the basement. Like we were going to get to the bottom of it in some way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, My question is about my year of rest and relaxation, and I was wondering about what the significance of sleep and sleeping for an extended duration of time was to you, and how maybe if you had some kind of internal explanation for how someone can, on one end, be, very unhappy about life and humanity, and then sleep for some time, and then come out of it loving it.
Well, I mean, interesting question. I don't know if she came out of it lovingly. I mean, I actually don't. Because I think if I was not the writer and just reading the book, I would have a question like, well, has she actually just damaged her brain? Like, is it, I don't know. I don't believe that you can take that shortcut. Is it's like, you can spend your entire life meditating and, live for the service of others and still not get to the point where you're like totally okay, So I think that the significance of that amount of sleep, man, I don't know how to answer that. I think it's really just, it's not like she spent that time like in this beautiful dream world, It was actually like really hard psychic work. And I think that for her, it was a way of getting through all that work without having to be conscious during it. Because we do learn and process a lot and figure things out and practice things in our dreams. So that's the way I saw it.
Hi, thank you for being here. My question is about the themes of rebirth. So I've read My Year of Rest and Relaxation, Eileen, Death in Her Hands, and I noticed that the protagonist really has a rebirth. Maybe that's halfway through the book or all the way at the end. And I was wondering if that played a role in Lapvona and if it played a role with a central protagonist or just the world in general.
Oh, man. Yep.
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah. You'll see. Thank you.
I'm going to take one from the virtual audience, from Nasli in California. What character, is there a character that you've written that you feel really connected to?
I would say that the character I feel the most connected to right now is Grigor from Lapvona.
Oh.
He's actually, except for the bandit, the first character we meet.
Yeah.
And on page 1. And then we don't see him for a while. And I had kind of thought, oh, this is like a really minor character. But when I got to Grigor in the book, I found that he was actually someone I really loved.
Yeah.
And felt for. And man, I don't know. He really just kind of got me.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah.
And he plays a really important role.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Yep. You're up.
Hi.
Hi.
It sounds like there's a lot more supernatural stuff going on in this book than in previous ones. Was that especially different or difficult for you, or did it feel like more of a natural extension of the extraordinary but not supernatural things that happen to your characters of recent novels? And also, what's the last thing that you read or watched where you felt like your intelligence was disrespected the way you described earlier?
Oh, I definitely want to know that one too.
Good Morning America. That's easy. I think that the magical element, I'm always kind of interested in like the miracle in story because it's, we can write a story. Are you a writer?
Not really.
Not really, so yes. We can write a story and, try to make it feel like realism. And that in itself is this miracle, like, dream that we're casting. It's like this, you're casting a spell on the reader who is forgetting that, maybe not forgetting, but suspending their disbelief so that they can buy into the story. And that, to me, is already a miracle, So I think that the supernatural in Lapvona is really kind of just an extension of that curiosity for me. And also, it was really fun. Yeah. Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a little short, but I hope this question is okay. It's a little bit off the beaten path. I am a writer, and you're my favorite writer. So you feel like a celebrity to me. And I've actually been writing a lot about celebrities, so I'm wondering, do you feel like a celebrity? And writing is such an interior and solitary process, and then to be on a stage like this one, or just to be doing a marketing circuit, what has your experience been of being a public figure?
Well, it's interesting because I actually feel like this is appropriate because I grew up, I was raised by classical musicians, and like performing in places like this, like not that I was a great musician, but it was part of my education. It was like they forced you to perform. And so being on stages doesn't feel like out of my wheelhouse. Do I feel like a celebrity? I do in the negative sense when I'm feeling awful. When I like put my name into Twitter, which I really shouldn't do, and see like all the nasty things people are writing about me. But no, no, I don't feel like a celebrity at all. I've always said this about having to do publicity, and that it's like just the biggest luxury. That like there are so many novelists who don't get to go on tours, who write amazing books, and I'm up for it. I didn't know it was going to be part of my life, interfacing with the public at all, but yeah, I mean, I can't complain.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Hi, thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
My question has to do with just a general theme about a few of your novels. I'm really interested in Death in Her Hands, in My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and in Eileen. There is a certain way that the protagonists tend to be judgmental of the appearance of other women, and to put it mildly. And I'm wondering if that is perhaps an observation of a wider culture role phenomenon, or now after this conversation, perhaps in the same vein as you were saying, maybe processing your experiences with chronic pain. And I speak as someone who else has also dealt with that, so do you mind just speaking on that a little bit?
Are you talking like more specifically about like fat phobia?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been impossible to live in this culture without getting the constant message that the only way to be an acceptable female is to at least be thin. And I feel like I'm not going to pretend like that, like I'm not going to pretend that messaging doesn't exist and doesn't affect my characters, especially my characters who are, Death in Her Hands. That woman hasn't had her own life. She has been controlled by her husband until his death. She has been programmed in some very toxic ways. My year of rest and relaxation, same, basically same kind of programming. She's naturally, tall and slender and has gotten a lot of positive feedback about that, living in New York in a time where heroin chic was in. It's vicious. So to me, to leave that out of the portrait of someone's experience is, I didn't want to leave it out. And it has had a huge impact on my own self-esteem and the way that I see myself. So it's an important issue. And maybe what I'm expressing is some of my vitriol, but certainly not vitriol against people who aren't thin. Sort of my vitriol against the system.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't want to get too personal. I know some people are uncomfortable talking about, faith and religion and things like that. But I'm just curious, do you identify as Jewish? I know you said your father was Jewish. And if so, how does that kind of impact the faith and religion that you write about in Lapvona? I haven't read it yet, but I'm always curious in people's relationship with the divine and kind of how that expresses itself in literature.
I think that my relationship with the divine is something that it was really born out of having been raised by musicians, and a lot of classical music that you learn is music that was written for the church, basically. And so that Christianity is really ingrained in a lot of my early education. I did not grow up as practicing any Judaism or any organized religion. My father's family weren't practicing Jews by the time I came around. They had all converted to the Baha'i faith, and my dad was not a religious person. So religion and faith were always this thing that was kind of like out there in the past and had this, shady mystery about it, especially given the history of Jews in Iran and my family's own history. I didn't even, there was, my parents were explicit in their not wanting to discuss religion. And so I kind of built a faith out of other things. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, we just have time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
So you talked a lot tonight sort of about the viscerality of your books, and you were kind of saying that you read these books as light kind of in spite of the constant barrage of horrors, which to me is interesting because I feel like in the kind of like literary tradition of the grotesque, like there often is like a humor there. There's a satire of like the human experience sort of like laid bare. Do you see yourself as operating like within the tradition of the grotesque? And like secondly, do you see yourself as operating within any literary tradition in particular, or is it just kind of how it happens?
That's a really interesting question, and kind of relates to the question before. Because I feel like just through osmosis, like we all kind of have a sense of, I can't say that I've ever read something that would be called a grotesque. I don't know what that tradition is, but I'm sure that because, culture is this like fluid thing and it all kind of influences each other, that I kind of have a sense of what it is, Yeah. And I really appreciate you bringing up humor. I don't really think of the book as a satire, but like I definitely see that a lot. Like I definitely see it, but there's supposed to be some comedy in there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to start by saying that I loved Eileen, and it really helped me go through the lockdown, so thank you.
Thanks.
I'm a political scientist, so I'm going to bring politics into the conversation, and I apologize for that in advance. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are in the relationship of your work with politics. In my reading, it's not explicit, but I see many things there that I take to my classroom because I teach politics and fiction, so I'm just curious about your thoughts. Thank you.
If I could answer that question well, I wouldn't have to write fiction. I leave it to the expert, to be totally honest. Yeah.
That's fair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you
so much.
so
It
much.
was such a pleasure.
Same.
Really.
Thank you.
Professor Moshfegh. Oh, now we go.
Thank you so much to Ottessa Moshfegh and Barrie Hardymon, and if everyone can please stay seated for just a minute while our guests exit out the back, it would be much appreciated. Autographed books are available for sale in the main lobby.